Hi, we continue in Luke 12 today as Jesus continues to try to teach his disciples how to trust more deeply in the Creator God as they move away from reliance on the Roman Empire and its way of patronage and hierarchy and toward the level place. So we saw last time how he compared ravens and noted how they didn't gather in the barns like the rich man in the preceding parable who was going to tear down his smaller barns and build up bigger ones. And then he compared flour to Solomon, noting, as you can see on the left side of the screen, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. So as we continue into this passage through verse 34, we'll see that the contrast between creation and an alternative way will really make clear that it has political implications in the contrast between the way of the nations of the world and the way of the reign of God. And that plainly will connect with various other places we've seen in Luke's gospel where this choice has been presented, but here focusing specifically on clothing and what one is striving for, what one is seeking, and the direction one's life is going. So as you can see on the right side of the screen, we've been following this thematic map through Luke 12, and I won't go over all the parts that we've seen so far, but trying to connect with how this follows the conversation in Luke 11 about prayer, and leading to the clarity that when one has the apocalyptic eyes to be able to see the sharp contrast between Rome's or Satan's misrule and God's rule, then there are consequences when one becomes afraid of what people will think of you or what the response will be when one testifies or witnesses for Jesus. And Jesus tried to prepare people to not be afraid. And then if they lost the benefits of empire because they'd lose networks or patronage, how they could come to trust in the Creator God. And so that's where we are now as we pick up in verse 28. As we've been looking at the key words, clearly anxiety was a key word here. But as we'll see when we get down to verse 30 here, this is really the center of the entire chapter. And you can see it if I just move out there. You can see the blue part is really just about the center of the entire chapter. And that's really the theme. And maybe one could even say it's the center of the entire gospel. For it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for His kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. But we'll look at it in its detailed context as we go. As we did last time, we've been looking at how what Luke is doing here in 12:22 to 34 follows what Matthew did in the Sermon on the Mount in 6:25 to 34. But since the last video, I added these three verses at the bottom, which I didn't have because they appeared to be just added simply by Luke. But curiously, in Matthew, as you can see, they come just before verses 19 to 21. So whoever's rearranged here, most scholars would say Matthew came first, although that's still a matter of debate, and I'm not going to enter deeply into that. Although to support the idea, there are a number of words in the Greek that are unique to Luke in this passage that are only also present in the Matthew passage. There are also some words that are unique in Luke in this passage that are not in the Matthew passage either. So we can't reach too many conclusions on that. But just to highlight that Matthew does have this business about where you store your treasure and what can harm it. So we'll be looking at that as well when we get to the bottom. So let's put the key words up and we'll continue through our passage. So if God so clothes the grass, and clothes is, the verb is twice in the ORSV here, but only once in the Greek down here. Literally, it's the Greek has edein argo ton korton, literally, but if the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown in the oven. So the New RSV provided a clothes for parallel with Solomon's clothed and how much more he will clothe you. And as we saw last time, there are a whole series of these how much more little versus larger comparisons here between creation and humans. We saw it with the sparrows, aren't you worth more than sparrows, etc. So the grass here is korton, a play on Korah, which is the land that produced well for the rich man in the parable earlier in the chapter. The grass of the field here is agro, which is the cultivated land. So interestingly, we saw the noun Korah there was for a large body of land, whereas the agricultural land is usually agro, but the man of the parable's land was Korah, not agro. So this would seem to be not so much grass of the field, but planted crops like the wheat that's mentioned earlier that would be put into barns. But either way, whatever species it is, it's still true that it is today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven. And oven is in the klibanon is on the New Testament, again, like the example I just gave only in Matthew, although we see a number of times this example in Malachi near the very end of the Hebrew Bible. At least in the Greek here, we see it describing the day of the Lord. See, the day is coming burning like an oven when all the arrogant and evil doers will be stubble. The day that comes shall burn them up, says the Yahweh of hosts. So a little different image of the oven as a sign of eschatological judgment rather than as the fragility of plant life. So how much more will he clothe you? Physy here, only here in the New Testament. Matthew has a different parsing of the same word, although the NRSV has the same translation, future tense there. You of little faith, oligopistos, also only here in Luke Acts. It's only Matthew in the New Testament. It's a regular word in Matthew 4 times. One of those suggestions that it's really a Matthew word that Luke is borrowing, taking the passages we saw. Green notes below, this is a hopeful sign that they will be able to attend to his message, and then when they will orient their lives in what must, apart from faith, seem a reckless direction, which of course is to reject all the norms of the status quo. And now we enter into the striving image, and we see it 3 times in 3 verses. I didn't list it as a key word because it's only in this part of the passage. The noun zetio, which is for seeking. And we saw earlier, seek and you will find, and this is don't seek and then seek. So we have a don't seek, this is why you shouldn't seek, and then what you should seek. So do not keep striving for what you are to eat or what you are to drink, which is to highlight that there's more to life, as we saw to that. Life is more than food and drink. If one is completely focused on that, and striving suggests what the focus of one's life is, how much one will miss. And this isn't just so much a matter of avoiding anxiety, it's a matter of embracing the richness of life. It's like so many people in our world today that chase money as if money was the central element of life, rather than seeing that money can be a vehicle for other things, just like food and drink are a vehicle for other parts of life, rather than the goals in themselves. So we saw eating and drinking a number of times, it's a key word. And then just generically, just do not keep being anxious or do not keep worrying, using a little bit of a different word here. Meteorizesthai, possible meanings to be arrogant or to make high demands. It's only 2 times in the Septuagint, so it's hard to know exactly what it means. Again, one of these unique words, not the same word we've been seeing for anxiety. And here's the contrast. Highlighting as my note has the religion of empire and the religion of creation contrast. We saw that with the comparison of a flower and with Solomon, the religion of empire in its chief glory produces a king like Solomon with his gold plates, and yet Jesus says the flower that's here today in the oven tomorrow reveals God's glory even more. And here's that similar contrast. It is the nations of the world, the ethnoi, or ethnos here, ethne in the plural. And curiously, Matthew's gospel, as we can see from the NRSV, has Gentiles, although it's the same word here, nations. So which is to say the non-Israelites and non-Jews. The nations of the world here, though, brings up an important contrast to highlight that in my thematic map I said the reign of Rome and Satan, and we see this here because here it's simply neutral, the nations of the world that strive for these things. But we recall in 4:5, the devil led him up and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world and said, I will give you their glory and all this authority, for it has been given over to me. The only catch is that you worship me. So the devil claims the kingdoms of the world and their glory and authority belong to him. And so that's why I highlighted Rome, Satan's rule on earth here. And that's part of the very misrule, that Satan, through Roman propaganda here, has led people to believe that striving for wealth and status is what life is about, and they could hardly be more wrong. Because God knows you need them. And notice the intimacy here. This is not about gender, father versus mother. This is God as father as opposed to the emperor as father, the parents patriae, the father of the country, and the paternal role within patriarchy of the emperor as the chief human patron underneath the patronage of the gods to provide for you. And of course, bread was provided through the provisions at the docks, where any Roman citizen could get their portion of grain, whether they were poor or not, as an expression of the empire's generosity. But the empire's generosity is to get people to be loyal to it, and God's generosity is to have people thrive, and of course also to be loyal to God. And so we see that if instead one thrives for God's kingdom, these things will be given to you. Notice, not for sale. You won't have to work for them. You won't have to earn them. They will be given to you. Prostesthai here, contrasting with 12:25, as we saw here, that you can't add anything to your lifespan or your height. These things will be given to you or added. And so, given all that, he can say, do not be afraid. And as Green notes below, in the economy intrinsic to the kingdom, those who give without exacting reciprocation are actually repaid by God. And that is the point that we saw earlier in the warning in the parable about those who are not rich toward God. And I noted the article that I was highlighting there, that rich toward God means giving your wealth to others in the name of God, and which becomes your treasure in heaven, as we see here. So do not be afraid, again, linking as we saw earlier with 12:7. Little flock, along with the fatherly image, the gentle sheep image here. As my note below has the little people with the rich farmer and Solomon, and the question of which flock, of birds or of sheep, it normally does apply to sheep, so we'll take it as sheep here, and we'll see sheep again with the lost sheep in chapter 15. It's your Father's good pleasure, eudokio, and we're calling 3:22 here, used for beloved, and so it's used for good pleasure or beloved there. So it's God's same attitude toward you here, the disciples, as it is toward Jesus, to give you the kingdom. The kingdom of God is not something earned, it's not something built, it's the gift of God. In other words, the kingdom of God is simply creation as it really is, without the interference of Satan's propaganda and lies that lead us into the imperial illusion that Jesus is trying so hard to get people out from under, now that they're awake and have the apocalyptic eyes to see through their practice of prayer. So they can receive this kingdom for free and have everything they need as long as they let go of everything that's in the way, which we see here. And we'll see this repeated here in 18:22 to a rich man, and parallel there. The entire verse, as my note below says, is a contrasting invitation to the failed purse of the rich man in the parable. Rather than seeking material security through selfish concern, seek it through faith expressed in community, almsgiving, and reciprocity. So that's what we see here. And to sell your possessions, as we'll see in Acts of the Apostles, doesn't mean to sell them and give it all away. It means sell them and have them available for everyone in their needs. The possessions, huperkanta, as we saw earlier in 12:15, and give alms. We've not seen a lot of almsgiving. We've only seen it one other time, as we've seen from texts like Sirach, who certainly support almsgiving in the sense of the rich not being greedy and giving some away. But what's at issue here in Luke, as we also would see in Paul, is giving away everything except the very essential that you need. If you have 2 coats, you should give one to someone who has none, and the same with your food. So giving to people is not for your benefit and your status signaling, look how generous I am. It's for a deposit in the bank of God, so to speak, as we hear as this verse continues. So make purses for yourselves, balantia, exactly what they weren't supposed to be carrying on the mission. This is plainly a metaphor here, like the swords we hear later. Now is the time to sell the spear and take up, or sell the farm instrument and take up the sword, Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, another word only here in the Gospels, an unfailing or inexhaustible treasure. Again, this word only here in the entire Bible. Treasures, thesaurus, we saw back in the Sermon on the Plain. Let's look at it back there for a moment, because it's very close here. The good person out of the good treasure of the heart, which we'll see here, produces good, and the evil person out of evil treasure produces evil. For it's out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. So heart there and treasure of the heart, echo what we hear here, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Treasure in heaven is not about the afterlife. We've seen nothing here about the afterlife. It's simply with the apocalyptic lens in the other realm. And it's an investment in the realm of God, where no thief comes near, as opposed to on earth, where there are plenty of thieves and no police in the Roman Empire. The word for thief here is kleptes, like from which we get kleptomaniac, not lestes, the supposed good thief on the cross, which is a whole different meaning that we'll see there. So here, no thief comes near and no moth destroys. We saw how Matthew had a little different version there, where moth and rust consume, or where thieves break in and steal, as the contrast there. But here, no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Which is to say, your heart should be with God, and that's where your treasure is. And that's where, if you're striving, everything will be provided. And we see that played out in Acts. So our story our chapter will continue here as Jesus calls the disciples to be awake and recognize that now is the moment to be prepared to enter into the kingdom of God in full. See you for that next time. Bye-bye.